What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? Tonight we have a live discussion between me and Jeremy, who is a YouTuber that I responded to a couple of weeks ago, and we managed to work out a time where we can discuss, his video or the things that he brought up in his video. And so we're going to be talking with Jeremy tonight. So if you're interested in these types of discussions, then please stay tuned. All right. Well, hi, Jeremy. How are you doing tonight?
Good. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I had a full day of work, and so, I had a powwow with some friends earlier, and now we're here. So, yeah, it's been great. How's your day been?
It's been good. Hard day at work, and then came home, went to the park with the wife and kids, and looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, nice. If it's not too personal, how many kids do you have?
Got two girls.
Oh,
One just
nice.
turned one, and the other's about to turn three.
Oh, okay, awesome. Well, I'm happy for you and your family there. I've got or we have a 9-year-old son that we have every other weekend, so it's pretty nice.
Nice.
But yeah, but anyway, so we're here to talk about your video that's entitled "Atheism is Crazy," and basically, what he brought up in it is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the world seems to be very designed, therefore God has to exist because of the complex design. Is that correct?
Yeah, and with a focus on DNA being information
Mhm.
slash code slash blueprint. Um, yeah, that's the main one that I really harp on is the DNA side.
Okay, cool. Well, I've titled the stream tonight, like, "Is the world designed by God?" And I'm wondering if maybe you could, I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit more on that, or maybe restate your case for it that is actually in the video.
Yeah. So in the video, well, first I made the point that I believe that DNA is information. It's code. It's like a genetic blueprint, and therefore we've only seen those things coming from a mind. So if we look at observational science instead of theoretical science, that there's a mind behind DNA, and then I went into talking about a 3D printer, and I should have been more specific, talking about abiogenesis. That I'm talking about non-life becoming life with by accident or without I'd say an unguided process might be a way to put that I don't see that as logical. And so I think that'd be like thinking that a 3D printer could create itself, since a cell, I believe, is just so amazing, and the mechanisms that are inside of it. It can build things, it reproduces, and it metabolizes. And so I just related that to a 3D printer.
Okay. So let's take some things one at a time here in the discussion. So let's first off with the DNA being complex. Now, you say that it's like code, but you understand that, like, DNA is not information as like binary information, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess my contention there would be that while DNA is controlled by, like, the laws of chemistry and all of that, the computer code would actually operate under different laws, and it is definitely formulated by, a human mind, whereas we actually have, like, natural processes to explain how DNA came about. There's the RNA world theory that talks about how RNA was there first, and then that eventually started to evolve into DNA, which it still uses RNA and everything like that now. But there are just these natural processes behind, like, DNA and all that chemistry, and I'm just kind of curious, how does that factor into your view of the world? Like, do you think that God is controlling these natural processes, or what do you think's going on there?
Well, I've really got two arguments that I discuss with people. First, is there a God? And then, if there is a God, what's the specific God, and has that God tried to reach out to us? And so in this argument, I'm not really worried. I'm just trying to help people become either theist or I guess the term is a deist or a deist, where they
Mhm.
think that a being created what you see, and then he kind of left it to be. And so if someone wants to be a theistic evolutionist, then I would say go that route. That I just don't see how information, because we know that the information for an organism is inside its DNA. You agree with that, right? That the DNA
Well,
determines what that organism becomes.
I mean, I would say that the DNA has the building blocks for the proteins that eventually become it, but there's a lot of different interactions that go on in there that help determine like how that organism is built. So, I mean, I would say that it does contain the building blocks of it, but that it's a lot more complicated than just having all of the blueprints like in every single DNA strand, and like your red blood cells know how to build like a tooth, a cell that's in your tooth or something like that. Like there are cells out there that can do that. Those would be the stem cells. They can become any cell, but like a red blood cell, while it has the DNA in it, it doesn't have like the knowledge or the information to build any part of the body.
Right. Yeah. But what I'm saying is, if you knew how to, and I guess people are learning more and more how to read the genetic code. But if you could pull out, if a scientist could look at the genetic code and they could read it, they could tell you what organism that is for. Would you agree with that? That just pretty much the information for an organism is in the DNA, even if a particular cell couldn't create that organism, but
Well,
that the DNA in it
well,
is the.
yes. Well, I mean, obviously, you can look at the DNA of blood and you can determine what kind of like animal it came from, whether it be a human,
Yeah.
pig, or whatnot. So, I mean, you can detect patterns and match those patterns to patterns that we already know about. But that being translated into like this in like information as it being comparable to a computer is not a very good analogy, at least in my opinion.
Right, gotcha. Yeah, and I think it is. And I think that's one point that we disagree in. That I do think it is similar to computer code or blueprint for a house. But I could just stick with the word information. That the information for that organism is in its DNA, and I don't believe information comes about by chance. I believe, or accident, or unguided. I think information always has a mind behind it, so not only for abiogenesis, that the first cell that would have DNA, that I don't believe that could come about by accident, but also then you can have natural selection and mutations that create more complex appendages, or how more complex things inside those organisms. I don't think even that could come about unguided, because I think there's more opportunity to mess up the genetic code. An unguided genetic code mutation, I believe, would degrade the information. And so I think if someone is a theistic or an evolutionist, I would think it'd be more logical to be a theistic evolutionist, that someone has to be guiding this code to making it work, because it's very easy, I assume, because I'm not a computer programmer. I did talk to a guy today who's a machinist, and he talked about just how specific it has to be when he creates parts on a CNC machine, and how he has to program it, and so it's got to be very fine tuned. And so I think it's the same way for genetic mutations to work. I believe it has to be unguided. I'm sure we disagree on that, or it has to be guided. I mean, and I don't think unguided genetic mutations would work. I think it would destroy the organism.
Well, so I guess piggybacking off of that, then how do you feel about genetic diseases? Because those are these mutations that are unguided that ultimately would contribute to the destruction of that organism, preventing it from spreading its particular genes. So, I mean, is that guided? So, what I'm taking away from this is that you're saying that God, like when a child is born and they have a severe genetic disorder or they are severely mentally challenged in some way, is that God that is guiding that particular mutation and making them that way? Does God make these genetic mutations, these diseases crop up?
Yeah, that's a good question, because so me as a Christian, if your followers don't know, I'm a professed Christian. So of course I believe that sin entered the world through Adam and Eve, and through that's where we get sickness and disease and all that. So if that's just the processes that came into being after humanity sinned, or if God is there making the diseases happen, I don't know.
Okay. So speaking about Adam and Eve and that being the original sin and everything like that, did let me ask you this in the Christian theology, as far as like Adam and Eve goes, did Adam and Eve know what was good and what was bad prior to eating the apple?
They knew they were not supposed to eat of that tree, whatever fruit it was, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Okay,
So
but
well, he told Adam that. So we assume Adam told Eve.
well, right. But I guess what I'm asking here is, did Adam know that it was bad to disobey God?
He knew he was told he would die. Don't eat of
Okay.
that fruit or you will die.
Well, I mean, do you think Adam could really understand what it meant to die?
I don't know. I assume he had, I assume he knew a lot.
Okay.
And so, yeah.
And another question that I've always had about this particular line of logic is, would would you say that it's ultimately women's fault that like sin and disease and all of that is in this world?
No, because the Bible says in the New Testament that it's through Adam that sin entered the world. So for whatever reason, God put that responsibility on Adam to not sin. So, what would have happened if Eve would have eaten of the fruit and not Adam? I don't know. Maybe Adam would have had to sacrifice himself for her. Who knows? Instead of,
Ah,
Jesus coming later to die for all of humanity, maybe Adam could have died for Eve and then he would have been resurrected. I don't know.
ooh,
So,
if
good question for heaven.
right, if Adam ate the apple first, would men be the ones giving birth?
I don't know.
That would be
He would
interesting.
certainly deserve it, wouldn't he? That's pretty bad curse. And I know having kids. That's
Well,
a rough thing.
yeah. Well, especially with the several thousands and actually millions of years where women died in labor, like a lot.
Yeah.
That's also pretty bad. Um, so uh, the original sin idea that it degrades our genetic code, and I'm just kind of curious. I've never really understood what it means to degrade genetic code.
Um, hmm. Well, I think it's just a general things are falling apart, slowly. So who knows what humanity. So, from my view, the genetic code was, I guess, cleaner, better with Adam, and then it's getting worse. And then kind of like how the universe is, I'm a young Earth creationist. I'll say that too. And so when I see the universe expanding, I don't believe it started with a single point. I believe God made it and it was going to be fine. It was going to, stay the way it should. And then Adam and Eve sinned. And then that's when sin entered the world. And then I believe that's causing the universe to expand also, that just everything is falling apart because we pretty much kicked the creator out in a way.
Okay.
So same
Well,
with genetic code then, that genetic code is there's diseases and sicknesses and people don't live as long as they used to closer to the Garden of Eden.
so I mean, would you consider yourself a creationist?
Yes.
Okay.
And young Earth creationist. And I appreciate you making the point. I don't know if it was in the commenting on my video or somebody else's, but you said, if God did create the universe, why did he wait so long to create humanity? And
Hmm.
I really appreciate that because I'm with you. And even Jesus, and you can use this talking to theists, even Jesus said that Adam and Eve were created at the beginning of creation. So Jesus had a young Earth creationist view. And so you can use that against Christians. If you really believe Jesus and you believe in an old universe, how do you put those two together?
Right. Well, I mean, technically in the Bible, the theology is that Jesus actually was the first created sort of son, and then Adam was created afterwards, because Jesus is the agent of creation of God. So,
Right.
like, Jesus was the one that, I guess if you followed it theologically with the New Testament and Old Testament considered, it would be Jesus that created the earth, right?
Right. Yeah, from John 1. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And that's talking about Jesus. Yeah.
Okay. Um, so as far as like the gene like degrading thing, I'm still not clear as to what it means for genes to degrade, because
It's
I mean, hold on, let me get this out. So you say that like things are falling apart, or our genetic code is falling apart, but I don't really see that, because if you look at the actual biology of humans and how long they lived through, various means, like looking at fossils, looking at all of that, seeing how long they used to live. As you go farther back in the past, it makes sense that humans wouldn't have lived as long because, like in the first century, you have humans living between like I want to say a generation is about 30 to 40 years, with humans not living too much longer after that. Like as far as like the poor humans go that didn't have like perfect or the best diets at the time or whatnot, the of course the upper class citizens of that day would have been fed a little bit better, so they would have lived a little bit longer. But we're talking about mean like lifetime span. They weren't that it wasn't that long, right? And as you go farther back, they're actually it gets shorter and shorter and shorter. So we actually don't have any actual evidence other than the Bible that people used to live to like 900 years old. But also, I'm wondering what kind of gene degradation would cause us to like shorten our lifespan like that, but then sort of hourglass it. If you understand what I'm saying, because we're starting to live longer now. Like we're living to the past 100 years old and whatnot through medical advances and through better nutrition and all this other stuff. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, what in the whole gene degradation thing, and it's okay if you don't know, but what in the gene degradation would cause us to shorten our lifespan down to very minuscule comparatively to, starting to increase?
Yeah, well, I would say you've got two sides of the story. You've got gene degradation, then you've got scientific discoveries, and I think that would explain the hourglass shape that as I think we're more susceptible to diseases probably than our ancestors if we look at things biblically, a biblical worldview. But then we've got science to really help us out in medication and just a great standard of living and sanitation. And I don't even think germs were discovered until like the 1860s or something like that. So,
Well, yeah,
yeah, we've come a long way.
yeah. So that was with Louis Pasteur. He's the first one that came up with the sort of what would become the gene germ theory
Yeah.
and microbiology in general. But I mean that I guess that would make sense if like we didn't have a scientific revolution until much farther down the line. So I mean, I guess I still don't know what it actually means to for the genes to degrade. Like I get that mutations crop up and everything like that, but not all mutations are bad. There's actually a lot more neutral and bad mutations than good mutations, of course. But the bad mutations generally don't persist through generations. The neutral mutations don't have any positive or negative effect on the organism, so they're just kind of there. So, with the amount of mutation that we see today in our genetic code and how that doesn't actually degrade our genetic code, I guess I'm just not really seeing this whole gene degradation and how our genes were more perfect at the creation of Adam and Eve, if you will, to now. Like, I guess I just don't understand that difference. Like, what's the difference between now and then?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know much. I mean, I'm just taking the Bible at face value that God created Adam and Eve good, perfectly. Sin came into the world, therefore death did, and diseases and sickness. And I believe that is making changes to us over time. But I first mentioned gene or genetic degrading or degradation, talking about why I don't believe in atheistic evolution. That if God did use evolution, I believe there would have had to been a mind behind it, because I believe it would have been, there are way more opportunities for harmful mutations instead of helpful. That, I really believe you have to have a mind creating positive mutations in an organism, because the theistic or atheistic evolution view is a single cell organism that eventually became everything that we see by natural selection. And I think if that were the way God did it, there'd have to be a mind behind it.
Okay. So, do you happen to know how these mutations crop up?
Um, just by DNA and being written wrong, being copied wrong, is my
Well,
understanding. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, that's one particular way that it crops up. There's several different ways that mutations can crop up, but I guess what I'm trying to say here is that the frequency of like the bad mutations and the good mutations and the result of that you have to understand that it doesn't match with the whole gene degradation idea. Not only that, but evolution has a self-correcting method in it without any kind of guidance, and that would be that the organisms that are produced that have those harmful genetic disorders or genetic mutations, they wouldn't persist long enough to actually spread it to the population. So I'm kind of curious. Would you be able to explain to me like your understanding of like natural selection and evolution?
Yeah. So starting with abiogenesis, that I've listened to what's his name, Aaron, I think the guy
Arn,
with the long hair, and just
yeah,
really trying to
Arn
understand it.
Ra.
Yeah. So my understanding is that you know a lot of these things come about naturally. So in my understanding of what is necessary for a cell is lipids, carbohydrates, nucleotides, and amino acids. That's everything you need to make a cell. And of course, he pointed out how those things occur naturally. But well, I'm not going to refute it right now. I'm just going to talk about it. So that those over time, eventually, nucleotides folding on themselves eventually became, I think, the most popular view is RNA first, and then that became DNA, and then somehow the first cell, what is it called, a protocell, and then from there there had to have been a lot of multiplication, so that there was many of these cells, and then these cells started to mutate, and they started to become multicellular organisms, and then from there things just kept mutating, and the things that mutated positively lived, the things that mutated negatively died, and then that's how we get everything we see here. The other point being that we are not necessarily descended from monkeys or apes, but apes and humans have the same descendant. And of course, all organisms descend from this one, um, the first cell that came about. So that's my understanding of abiogenesis and natural selection after that.
Okay. Well, I mean, you did a pretty good job of describing evolution. I would make a few corrections here, in that, like, we share a common ancestor with other great apes. And so, like, I mean, you got the overall picture of how evolution propagates, through time. But, like, each one of those is, like, you can represent them as, like, leaves or clades. And so, like, for humans, there was a proto great ape, and then from that proto great ape species, it evolved into different types of that great ape. And
Yeah.
so, like, and then you would progress backwards from that particular species. It shares a proto ancestor with other species out there and everything. And so you just follow that all the way back to the first cell.
Right.
Now, another thing I need to correct you on is the idea of the harmful and good, like, mutations, because tell me if I'm wrong, but I get the sense that you feel like these mutations are objectively harmful and objectively good. Is that right?
Um, well, I mean, first of all, I mean, that the ones that are helpful to the organism, those are the organisms that thrive. So if there's let's say snails, just picking a something. Well, the snails that have a positive change, they thrive, and the ones that don't possibly die out, and so we never see those, and then it goes from the ones that survived, and of course there could be several that evolve differently, and so you've got different kinds of snails. So not that it has to be good or it has to be bad, but just that the good thrive, and the negative mutations uh, die off if it's
Right.
bad enough.
Right. And but I guess I was getting at, you understand that it's very dependent on the environment that they are in.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
All
Yeah.
right. So like, because evolution has this self-correcting sort of mechanism in it, in that the harmful mutations that don't help the organism survive in its environment, those that die off don't propagate those particular harmful ones, and only the good mutations that help them survive in their environment. Where exactly do you see the guided hand in that? Because that
Yeah.
would mean that God is creating these harmful ones and needlessly killing, like, animals and humans and everything like that. So I'm just kind of curious, where's the guided hand in that?
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, I'm not a theistic evolutionist. I believe that I'm a young earth creationist. So I believe
Right.
God made fully formed organisms and then he gave them the ability to adapt to their surroundings, I guess known as microevolution. So I believe in microevolution, but not macroevolution. I don't think we
Okay.
have a common ancestor. But for those who are theistic evolutionists, I'm saying that's more logical based on what I know about information that let's take the alphabet. You've got somebody randomly selecting letters. Well, more often than not, way more often than not, they're not going to come up with words, and they're definitely not going to come up with complete sentences if they're just closing their eyes and picking letters. And so I'm saying that's the same way I believe, which I know you disagree, but I believe it's the same way with genes and DNA that these unguided genetic mutations, I believe 99.999% of the time would not be positive. They would not create a complex mechanism because man, look at organisms, look how amazing they are. And look at these complex mechanisms inside of them that it would take a mind to create positive mutations is my belief. If
Okay.
God chose to do it that way, which I don't think he did.
Right. Well, okay. So I'm sorry. I started talking along the lines of you were being a theistic evolutionist, and so I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean to like ascribe beliefs that weren't yours.
You're
Um,
good.
yeah. So you mentioned that you believe in microevolution and not macroevolution. Um, what is the difference between those two?
The information's already there. So the information for different eye color, different size beaks, depending on the organism, the information's already there inside it. It doesn't have to be created. And so as the organisms reproduce, the ones that have if it's a cold environment, they've got more fur, they'll thrive. And so if you've got, God created dogs and you've got dogs in colder environments, they'll have longer hair. The dogs in warmer environments will have shorter hair, but that the gene, the code, genetic code was already written.
Okay. Do you know what the law of monophyly is?
No.
Okay. The law of monophyly, what that explains is that, like, basically a dog or a canine, rather, will always produce something that is considered a canine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you usually what creationists talk about as dogs will always produce dogs, meaning
Right.
that they won't ever change species. But in reality, we see organisms changing species all the time. Have you ever heard of a thing called ring species?
No.
Okay, ring species is when imagine you have like a lizard that starts
Okay.
out on one side of the map, and then that lizard, that community of lizards, breaks off into two, and they travel in different directions, and they meet up on the other side. So when they meet up on the other side, generations and generations later, they've actually changed genetically so much to where they cannot reproduce. And I know in the Bible it talks about separating out these kinds of animals through the ability of reproduction. So I'm kind of curious. We observe and we find these types of species out in the world, being that they're ring species, they can't reproduce with each other, even though they're the same quote unquote kind of animal. And I'm kind of curious how you would explain that particular thing.
Well, first off, that's neat. I've never heard of it, and I do want to research that more. But also, was it that they still dealt with the information that was already in them? They didn't create new information, new genetic code, but because of their different environments, they used different genetic code that was in them and then just became so different because they were just using through microevolution using such different parts of their genetic code that was more helpful for the different environments.
Okay, so when you say new genetic code, I'm kind of curious what you mean by that.
Well, for to looking at the evolution, common ancestor, you look at a single cell organism. I'm assuming you believe soon after abiogenesis we have this single cell organism. It did not have the genetic code for feathers, right? That would have had to evolve later through genetic mutations, and that's more information. And so that's what I'm saying about more. That the if evolution is true, a common ancestor, the original ancestor would not have had all the genetic code for all the life. That would be millions. What is it? Hundreds of millions years since is the according to the theory of evolution since the common ancestor.
Well, I think it'd be more on the order of billions, but yeah, I mean, you're on the right
I'm
track.
sorry, billions. Yeah. So in other words, it didn't have the original cell that came about from abiogenesis did not have all the genetic code necessary for all the mechanisms for organisms billions of years later, that those would have had to have been added on through evolution.
So let me try to compare this a different way because the DNA is a chemical, and so it's not so much information because I know that I've been going along with calling it information, or at least not saying anything about you saying that it's information. But DNA is a chemical, and so in that respect, the DNA of different organisms is just different. You know, so would you say that it's removing information or adding information when you compare the differences between Coke and Diet Coke?
I mean, it's probably both, removing and adding. You're taking out sugar and you're putting out an artificial sweetener.
Well, is it really removing information from it though? Because I mean, you're changing the formula, and so you're not necessarily adding information or taking away information. You're just changing the formula, right?
Yeah, changing the recipe, which might be a good word for DNA. It's genetic recipe.
Right. Yeah, I think that would be a very good way of explaining DNA as a recipe. But just like you're not really adding or removing anything, you're just changing the formula, and because you change that formula, the organism builds differently. You see where I'm going with that?
I mean, kinda. I mean, I think Diet Coke and Coke are very different, and I think you're changing the recipe. I mean, as far as I know, you're just replacing the sugar with artificial sweetener. There might be more to it.
Well, no, no, no. I mean, on a surface level, I mean, I think that's pretty fine for the type of discussion that we're having. You're changing out the sugar for aspartame or Splenda. That Coke has been using Splenda now as a sweetener, but I mean, they just change the formula of it to give it the different taste and the less carbs and all this other stuff. Which I'm a diabetic, so carbs are usually first thing on my mind. Um,
Yeah.
but so you're really just changing the formula. So I mean, you can understand how I don't understand why like why you consider it to be adding information or removing information. I see it as it changing the formula, and therefore when you change the formula, you produce a different organism, or you produce a slightly different organism, like with Coke and Diet Coke. So I'm wondering what do you think about that?
Well, I think if you're comparing Coke to the original cell, then you should compare what we have now with the most complex organisms like us. That's like comparing Coke to a Coke factory. I mean, I would just see so many more complex things happening inside of a human than inside of a single cell organism. I mean, just look at me and my eyes and the ability to think, and the different hands, just the speed I can run, how you and I can build machines, and we can navigate those machines. I just see, I could see Coke and Diet Coke being the first couple cells, but I'm talking Coke and a Coke factory is the difference over billions of years, supposedly.
Well, to play into the whole Coke aspect, I mean, I would say that a Coke and Diet Coke is more like the American black bear versus a polar bear,
Yeah, that's good. Good analogy.
which are two different species, but they're still bears because they're in the same clade, and because of the law of monophily, they won't ever be anything but that clade of bears, but they could possibly change form. Do you understand how that works?
What do you mean by form? Become something that's not a bear
Well,
eventually?
well, yeah, well, not no. So because of the law of monophily, it will always be in that clade of a bear, right? So you could always consider it to be a bear, but just like with, let me use a real world example of dolphins and whales. Did you know that dolphins and whales actually come from a land quadruped that they share an ancestor with?
Yes, I did know that was one of the working theories. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, we know that for certain because it has vestigial limbs and pelvis on both dolphins and whales. And so basically, what you have is a land quadruped that changed environment and then adapted to that environment through these mutations that happen. And it, of course, took millions of years in order for it to happen, right? But the fact is that that land quadruped turned into a sea dwelling mammal.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, and my issue is going from the single cell organism to the dolphin or the quadruped that you mentioned. That it would have had to
Okay.
get a lot of stuff right. So let's say you've got in evolution, you've got these positive mutations that are helping an organism thrive. Well, that could easily, be knocked out by some bad mutations. And I think a good one for I don't know if you've ever listened to James Tour or if your listeners have, but he uh he works in nanotechnology and he does a really good job of saying how these mutations that create new mechanisms that lead to new organisms or more complex organisms, these are not easy to do, and he has to deal with it in nanotechnology where he slowly takes these nanoparticles and creates machines with them. And he so anyway, to me, he and even Stephen Meyer, those are my two favorite apologists and proponents of intelligent design, that we're not talking about small things. I mean, just imagine if you had to build a single cell organism, nobody on earth could do that. Now imagine if you have to take a single cell organism that exists and by guided processes with your mind, which you should be able to do it, or we should be able to do it faster than evolution, create a dolphin. I mean, just think about how you'd have to create more and more mechanisms to make it more complex.
Okay. Well, I mean, you see, you have to understand that evolution takes a long time, and I feel like you're not really like factoring that into your explanation here because while we can't do it in our lifetime, it has in fact happened because like with the whale and the land quadruped, I mean, we have fossils where we can trace kind of like connect the dots of how that animal transformed into these sea dwelling creatures. So you have to understand that if you take into account the fact that like we can radiocarbon date meteorites as well as lava rock or rocks from deep inside the earth, and we can date it to 4.5 billion years old. With that amount of time and with the amount of chances that organisms have to reproduce for mutations to happen, you understand that like given all of that, it's perfectly reasonable to consider evolution to be a viable option.
Not for me, and I do understand that that is the the joke. I'm sure you do among theists that atheists say if you give me enough time, anything is possible, and I disagree. I would say I don't believe with an infinite amount of time that you could go from non-life. Think about the all the things on the earth before abiogenesis. I don't think that would ever, for all eternity, turn into a dolphin. I don't see things coming together without a mind creating these complex mechanisms. I don't believe that abiogenesis has any chance of being possible. I don't believe non-life can accidentally become life. I don't care if you have an infinite amount of time. James Tour made the good point. I'll give you lipids, carbohydrates, nucleotides, amino acids. He's like, I'll even give you working DNA. You put all that together, you cannot produce a living cell. Living cells are special. Living cells, we've only observed cells coming from previous cells. And so I don't think that first cell could come about by accident, by natural processes. I just don't think, because I mean, lipids don't think, nucleotides don't think. They don't have this mind. They're not saying, look, I've got to become a living cell. They just exist and they just lay there. And sure, there might be some things, they might do some folding, it might look like they're doing some copying, but to go from that to a fully functional cell, and I think a fully functional cell operates like a factory. There's great YouTube videos that show what's going on inside of a cell. These aren't Christian websites, these aren't Christian YouTube channels, but secular videos about what happens inside of a cell is like crazy amazing. And I don't think that could happen by chance.
Okay. Well, I guess I don't understand the logical leap that you go to in order to get to the fact that God, or there had to be a God or a guiding hand in all this when we actually have, you know, explanations for it. Like, for instance, I mean, we have explanations, for how evolution happened. We have physical evidence for evolution actually happening. Like you said that you don't think that a land quadruped could ever turn into a whale or a dolphin, but I mean, we plainly have like physical evidence that shows that it actually did that.
That might. I mean, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. I just don't think a single cell organism could accidentally, over an infinite amount of time, become a dolphin or a quadruped.
Okay. Have you ever heard of a thing called pigeonhole theory?
Yes, I think you mentioned it. You've got 12 holes, 13 pigeons. You'll definitely have two pigeons in a hole.
Right. Okay. So if you're given an extremely large set for something to happen, then no matter how small that percentage of it actually happening, it will most definitely 100% happen. So while there's like a small percentage of a chance that like abiogenesis would occur or that the exact right conditions would be met in order for that to happen, you have to understand that due to that concept, the pigeonhole concept, it would have to 100% happen at least once in that amount of time. So I feel like taking that into consideration with the fact that we have been able to physically show that animals can change form into different versions of that animal and for them to look drastically different than they actually were. If you expand that across time and across multiple different organisms, like I was talking about, then I mean, it's pretty simple to see how you could go from a single celled organism all the way up to what we have, the diversity of life that we have now.
And I probably believe in once we have a living organism, I can buy natural selection better. But it's really, I have a hard time with abiogenesis. It would be like, I think it'd be like buying a simple, like the other day, I built a solar powered dinosaur with my daughter. And, it's probably made of 50 different parts, or probably more like 30. I would give you, and I know atheists say you can't compare biology to mechanics, but it's really the closest thing we have. And so I think believing that non-life could become life is just as irrational as believing that that solar powered dinosaur would have put itself together even in an infinite amount of time. I don't think that's plausible. Things do not become I don't believe things become more complex over time. I believe they become less complex, and things that don't move or things that are not alive do not accidentally become alive.
Okay, so you said that you don't think that things become more complex over time, but like think of the last time that you went shopping. All right, I mean, you started off with what in your basket?
uh I went to the grocery store, got dishwashing detergent or dishwashing cleaner,
Well,
dishwashing
no,
detergent.
so the analogy that I'm going for is like when you first walk into the grocery store and you have your basket and everything like that, you don't have anything in it, right? Let's
Hmm.
say that you were going to be going there and you were going to be getting the smallest amounts of anything that you could get, making tiny variations during your trip. At the end of your trip, by the time that you got all the stuff that you needed, it would be quote unquote more complex. Would it not?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the difference is there's a mind behind it. There's a mind that made those products. So I don't see in Earth with no life on it and no minds, I don't see things pulling pieces together, saying I'm going to create a cell when there was no mind there, no guidance. So yeah, I believe
Okay.
guided. Yeah, I mean, obviously, with our cell phones, that's definitely more complex than what people had, 100 years ago. But again, there's a mind behind it. I do believe minds make things more complex. So I should have been more clear, but I don't think unguided processes become more complex. I think unguided processes become less complex over time. They degrade and they, yeah, get less complex.
Okay, but you have to understand that that doesn't actually match reality. I mean, we have various experiments like the Miller-Urey experiment that shows how how we could conceivably create life from non-life, and we've got a lot of natural processes that we've figured out in the lab. We've tested for, we observed, we've double checked our stuff, and we have shown that these natural processes happen regardless of a mind. So at least any perceptible like detection of a mind. So I'm just kind of curious, what is the linchpin, I guess, in you believing that there had to be a mind? Why couldn't that agent or that catalyst, or however you want to describe it, why couldn't that have just been natural processes happening?
Well, because my understanding of all those studies is that they created amino acids and they created the building blocks of a living cell, but they didn't create a living cell. Back to the solar powered dinosaur I built. It's all those pieces together. If you could show me that those pieces came about by accident or unguided processes, I'm still not impressed because it didn't create the functioning, moving, solar powered dinosaur. And same with the living cell. I'm not impressed by people, amino acids and the building blocks that came about unguided. Well, actually, those were guided because they were in a lab. But even if they did it in a way that represented the earliest situation that the living cell would have come about in, they just made building blocks for a cell. They didn't make a living cell. And I think there's a huge difference. It's like, I'm not a mechanic. If people dropped off all the parts to a Chevy Corvette at my house, I couldn't put them together and they wouldn't come together by accident. And same with a living cell. And I actually believe a living cell is more complex than a Chevy Corvette because it can metabolize and it can reproduce.
Well, I mean, I feel like that's a bit of a false analogy there because of the fact that, yes, of course, a mind had to build a Chevy, but that's because we don't have natural processes to explain how that Chevy or any kind of car or machine could come about naturally. But I mean, we have natural explanations. Like you say that we haven't shown how, the amino acids could be built, and then those amino acids transform into RNA, and then those RNA molecules eventually turn into DNA molecules, and then that DNA molecule eventually has a cell wall and a membrane and mitochondria and all of the different working parts of a cell. But I mean, we don't have to show every single little step of that. All we have to show is that, oh, amino acids, they can form by themselves through the natural processes that controls the laws of chemistry. And then we can also show how those things can they can stack on top of each other. They can form into these structures, and then we can show how RNA could have developed and all this other stuff. Like, you have to understand that because it's a natural process, that means that there doesn't need to be a guiding hand in it. So I'm wondering, what other natural processes do you think God has a hand in? Like, do you think lightning strikes or weather or the rain cycle or anything like that has God's guiding hand in it?
Well, first, if you don't mind me going back to your explanation about the cell coming into existence, I still think you mentioned, yeah, they can show in a lab how the building blocks for a cell come about, but they can't show the cell actually coming together and starting to be alive. Life is no joke, right? You could take a Ziploc bag, put some flies in it, you could kill those flies, and you've got all the pieces, all the parts to a fly, and those flies are not going to come back together. Now, maybe new flies, maggots might grow out of their bodies, but life is amazing. Life is special. You could take me and you could kill me, and then you can't put me back together. Of course, I believe God could, but you can't. You've got all the pieces to me, and that's what I'm saying about the abiogenesis is that we don't see that happening in our world. We don't see that happening in science. Yeah, we see the building blocks to a cell. They can show where that might come about, but we don't see how life would be in it. The pieces, biological pieces laying there are very different than a living organism that is able to metabolize. It is able to reproduce. You know what I'm saying? It's, again, you could kill me, you could cut me up into small pieces, but you cannot make me alive again. And that's what I'm saying about abiogenesis. You could get all the pieces to a living cell together, but you can't give it life.
Well, but have you ever heard of the black swan fallacy?
No.
Okay,
Heard of the movie?
so basically, before black swans were discovered, you could have said, "Oh, swans are only white," until you find the black swan that they found in Australia, and then that becomes disproven. So you have to understand that when you say, "Oh, this can't happen," you're saying that, "Oh, we haven't observed it to happen, or we can't produce it in the lab." But that doesn't necessarily mean that it can't happen. That just means that we haven't discovered the process, or the event that has caused it to happen yet. So it's not definitive that it cannot happen. So I'm wondering, like, why do you think it can't happen?
Just because of how I see the world and what I see, we know and I know that atheists do not believe in spontaneous generation. That's different than abiogenesis, but we know that life comes about from life. I mean, it's just it's observational science. We know where life comes from previous life. And of course, I believe there's a super intelligent mind who's outside of our universe who made life on Earth. But I think that's more logical to believe that something more complex created life, a mind and life outside of our universe, than believing that it came about by accident. So, and I know we disagree on this, so we don't have to spend too much time on this, but I don't believe that non-life accidentally becomes life. I don't see that in my world. I know somebody mentioned on the internet or Facebook the other day that, when you eat something, non-life becomes life, but I don't think anyone believes that became a separate organism.
Okay. Now going back to you talking about how you can't, if I cut you up, then I wouldn't be able to put you back together. I can't do that. God could do that, but I can't do that. Um, well, then I'm kind of curious, why would God allow some organisms to be able to regenerate after that, but other organisms He doesn't?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's cool though, but I don't think it happens by killing the entire organism. Is that right? You could, cut off a lizard's tail, it's able to grow it back, but if you
Well,
killed the organism, you couldn't put it back together again and make it alive.
Well, I mean, like, with different sponges, or with different reptiles. I mean, yeah, you can grow back appendages and everything like that. Now, I mean, if you cut off its head, it's not going to grow back an entire
Yeah.
body, of course. But my point is that if God had a hand in making us, why did He make us so imperfect and so easily killed when
Yeah, great
it's
question.
perfectly plausible that He could have?
Yeah, yeah, and I think he did. I think he made us to live forever. I think he will do that. Um, I believe we were not meant to die when he made Adam and Eve. And I know a lot of people say, well, why did God create this entire universe? And I believe we were meant to explore it faster. That, imagine if sin never entered the world, that people lived forever and they had indestructible bodies. Well, that would really help with space exploration. And then the Bible tells us that whenever, Christians, people that believe in Jesus Christ, he died, he rose again, he had a body that could be touched, but it's an invincible body. So one day, the promise is for Christians that we'll be in a new earth, that he's going to destroy this universe, he's going to make a new heaven and a new earth, and heaven is just a way that they said universe in the New Testament, and that we'll have new bodies. There'll be no pain, no death forever. So I believe that was his original goal. I believe sin got in the way, and I believe it's going to happen to those of us who have let Jesus take our sin. We'll get to live forever, which I'm really looking forward to space exploration in the new earth.
Oh, you think there's going to be like a space program?
I do, yeah. So I believe God is going to create a new heaven and a new earth. You can read it in the last few chapters of the Bible. And so it's going to be a physical earth, and there's going to be, I believe, other planets, and I believe we're just going to be able to have so much. There's going to be able to have fun the way He originally intended, that we can explore and do what we want to do in these bodies that can't be hurt. So I love architecture. I love coffee. I love pizza, and I love cars, and I love space, and I think I'll be able to really fully enjoy those things in the new earth, in a sinless body, a sinless environment where there'll be no pain and suffering.
Okay. I mean that sounds like a really great thing. I guess. I mean, me personally, I don't want to see eternity. Like, I think that it would be rather, I guess, horrible if I lived forever. Uh, well, especially with how the Bible talks about heaven, because the Bible talks about heaven as just being eternal worship to God. Is that not correct?
Yeah, but man, isn't it worship when you eat a great meal and you tell the chef how much you love it? Isn't that worshiping what the chef did for you? And so if you haven't, read the last two chapters of the Bible. I know you're going through the 1 year Bible slowly, focusing on the Old Testament. I listened to one of those videos, but yeah, read the last couple chapters. We will be in a new earth, so we'll be in physical bodies in a physical world. Jesus will be here. There will be no night, is what it says. And so just imagine an eternity of making new friends and discovering new hobbies. And you're just constantly thanking God for all that. I mean,
Mm,
that to me, that worship is thanking God for what he's done for you. And so heaven is experiencing more because, man, God made sex, God made food. I mean, God made awesome stuff for us to enjoy. And in Psalms, it says that in his right hand, there's pleasure forevermore. God made orgasms. Think about that. That's awesome. That's fun. God made food.
well,
God made
if
coffee.
I mean, considering that, why did God put my little orgasm button up my butt?
No, I don't know, but I don't know. That's weird.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know why. Maybe
Okay.
to make going to the bathroom feel better. I have no idea, but we do know we're in a fallen world. I'm not saying that's part of being in a fallen world, but we can. I'll ask him that when I get there.
Okay. Now you just said that in this new physical Earth and everything like that, there would be no night.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of people, and I'm sure you've mentioned it, it's weird that God created light in Genesis before the sun, the moon, and the stars. And I
Right.
believe that was prophetic because in the last couple chapters of the Bible, it talks about that Jesus is the light and he illuminates the world for us, which I know sounds weird and it goes definitely against everything we know naturally. But even when he was on earth in Matthew, it talks about he was on a mountain and he shone bright like the sun to his disciples. And so there's just this idea that Jesus, and he said it about himself, I'm the light of the world. So eventually Jesus will be here on earth with us and he will illuminate the whole world. Now, of course, how does that work? If he's on one side of the earth, how is it light on the other? I'm not quite sure, but it does tell us that there'll be no more night.
You had me worried there for a second. I thought you might have been a flat earther.
No, no. Oh man.
Okay.
And I was gonna say we agree on a lot of things. We agree that the earth is a sphere. We agree you shouldn't give a Bible to children. There's some crazy stuff in it. We probably agree on the government should not tell you who you should love. I think the government needs to get out of marriage. I'm a Christian, and I do want to start a political page. But man, conservatives need to not be controlling and they need to not put their religion. I don't believe there should be prayer in schools because, I mean, what prayer? A Muslim prayer, a satanic prayer.
Right.
I am very adamant. And I think what something, I believe atheism is wrong, obviously, but I think something worse than atheism is legalism. It's telling people they've got to earn their way to God. That's who Jesus had problems with. That's who Paul had problems with is the people that were telling the others that they needed to earn their salvation. They need to do this, and this. And so I don't want someone teaching my kid a prayer in school where they've got to earn their salvation, that God doesn't like them if they don't keep these certain rules. So anyway, I think we probably agree on a lot of things, like those things.
Yeah. No. I mean, I have to say that I commend you about having that particular position because you don't find a lot of Christians out there right now that want to do that. I mean, I don't know if you saw recently, but a bunch of Christians wanted to cancel the show Good Omens, and they thought it was on Netflix when it's actually an Amazon show. And
Oh,
so, like, they wanted to cancel it because they considered it blasphemous. And so, I'm glad that you're not part of the crowd that wants to like restrict the freedoms of other people.
no, absolutely. We can look at Jesus. Anyone can look at it. He was trying to change hearts. He wasn't trying to force anyone to follow him. Um, yeah, if anything, he came across as really really off-putting, especially in John 6, and he didn't mind people leaving him. So I like how secure he was in what he believed he was.
Okay. Now to go back to something that wasn't answered, and then we're going to get into some audience Q and A from my skeptic mafia.
Okay.
For one thing, you said that atheism is wrong. I'm guessing you mean that it's incorrect, or do you think that atheism is like an immoral stance?
I think it's incorrect, an incorrect worldview. Yeah, I'm gonna have to say, I do believe it's written in people's hearts. I think it is immoral to not believe in God. I think it's obvious, and I know that's hurtful, and of course, or that's not a kind thing to say to people. But yeah, I think there's some kind of blind spot when I could, when if somebody can listen to James Tour, and I've got friends that I've sent Stephen Meyer stuff too. I think Stephen Meyer does a great job of talking about DNA and how it's information, and information doesn't come about by accident. And I know you disagree with that, but I think he explains it so well that there's just a blind spot with people that they just can't see that. They can't see the obviousness that we have a creator.
Okay, so what would your definition of immoral be exactly? Because like I don't find myself to be very immoral. I mean, I donate to, charities and I help people out all the time. I do my best to be what it means to be a good person. So I guess I just don't see how I'm immoral just because I lack a belief in your particular God.
Great question. I think a great analogy is, imagine we're all employed by God, and you know, you're telling people there is no boss. You can do whatever you want, and there's a lot of people telling people to do the wrong thing. So if God's will is perfect, and God made us to accomplish certain things, and I believe everyone, if they would give their lives to God, He would give them a mission to help the world. Well, if you've got a mission to help the world and you're not on it, then even though you're the kindest and I so many atheists I'd rather spend time with than Christians, because you're kinder, and but I still don't think that changes the fact that, if God exists and God has a will for your life, for you to not do that is wrong. And if you have an employer and he wants you to run the cash register, but you want to mop the floor, you're still doing something helpful. But if you're not doing what you were supposed to be doing, that's how it's immoral. It's not immoral as far as a kind or unkind. It's immoral as you have a mission that you should be getting at or
Well,
working on.
you understand how that's a little bit of like a confusing language, right? Because when we generally talk about immoral things, we're talking about like a pastor that abuses his power and molests young kids. Like
Yeah,
that would
or
be immoral. And I would expect you to consider that to be immoral, but like I don't see how me not believing in a god is comparable to that situation.
no, I don't think it is. But as far as immoral as a whole, let's take homosexuality, for instance. My goal in life is not to make gay people straight. My goal in life is to help people who are not living for God and they don't believe in God, to help them believe and to help them accept his love. I really think, the message through Jesus is that if you accept me, you'll be forgiven, and, you will be God's child. And so everything stems from that. Homosexuality is just the, I don't trust what God says about sexuality, or all any other sin, any other thing that's immoral, really stems from, I don't trust what God is saying to do that. And I still think, someone could live a life that's very kind and helpful. They donate, they do all these things, but if God had a mission for them to accomplish and they didn't accomplish that mission, then that's a type of immorality, I would say.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Well, no, I mean, I understand what you're talking about here, but I still feel like the way that you're defining morality, or what it means to be immoral is still a little confusing. But I mean, I understand what you mean by immoral and moral. Now, how do you feel about Christians that are gay? Do you feel like they're disobeying God or they're rejecting God at all?
Yeah, I think they're disobeying. But I mean, along with so many other sins. So yeah, I think someone who's actively who says that they follow Jesus Christ, they've given their life to Christ, but they haven't given their sexuality to Christ is wrong. And same with someone who watches porn, which I mean, man, that's tons of men, tons of pastors. That's wrong for them to continue to look at porn, or or man, a man that doesn't love his wife, or a man that doesn't love his children, or I think it's immoral for the Roman Catholic. I have so many problems with the Roman Catholic Church, but one of them is that they forbid their priests to marry. That is it. Even I'm sorry, I don't have a Bible or anything in front of me, but there's a verse that says forbidding people to marry is demonic, and you could look that up. I want to say it's either First or Second Timothy, but man, look at the damage that's caused. So much child molestation from all that pent up sexual desire.
Okay.
Well, let me
Go
say one
ahead.
more thing. I'm sorry. So if
No,
you
no,
look
no.
up
You go ahead.
Romans 12, 1 and 2, it talks about, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Um, I'm sorry, I'm not messing it up, but this is your spiritual act of worship anyway, to give yourself to God, that his will is good, pleasing, and perfect. So if you've got God's will that's good, pleasing, and perfect for all of us, and it's different in as far as what we should pursue, as far as how to help the world, well, any deviation from that, I believe, is immoral. That God has a perfect will for us, and if we don't follow that, we're actually causing pain we don't know about. Like if God wants to use me to go talk to somebody that's depressed, and I refuse to do it, well, that's immoral. God at that moment wanted me to go encourage somebody.
Okay. And to just get sort of a final answer on another question I had, then we're going to go into the actual questions and whatnot that
Okay.
I've got piling up. But I had asked you earlier if God has his hand in any of the natural processes that we know to occur, like weather or the rock cycle or any of these other natural processes that we see that there's no guiding hand for, at least that we can perceive. Do you think that God has a guiding, like an active guiding hand in those processes?
Yeah, to what degree? I mean, it says that, let's see, something to the effect of, in him everything moves and has its being. So number one, he set up laws. He set up natural processes, the water cycle and all that, and gravity, weak force, strong force, electromagnetism, so many other things. Yeah, he set those things up, but I still think he's an infinitely intelligent being, and I still think he's still in all that, and he knows. The Bible says he knows every hair on our head. He knows when a bird falls to the ground. So whether he just created that in motion to do its own thing and he's watching it, or he's actively involved with everything, I'm not sure.
Okay. All right. I mean, I would say that if we have a natural explanation for something, or we have a natural process that explains it, then that means that there's no need to insert a god or a supernatural being to cause that to happen. So, I mean, I feel like we have natural processes to explain everything that we perceive in this reality, everything that we observe in this reality, and everything that we experience. So, I just feel like that pushes God into the realm of, the I don't know, the God of the gaps.
Well, I'd say even if we know how well it works, it doesn't negate the fact that it was built. If I found out how a motor worked, that doesn't negate the fact that somebody built it. So I credit him for starting these things, and I'm sure you've heard of the fine tuning of the universe, which I've heard arguments for it and against it. But I think I think he set all of it up to work perfectly. I just found out the other day that the water cycle works with the moving moving plates. I'm not even saying it right, but the Platonic cycle or whatever. So to move
Plate
minerals, move water.
tectonics.
Yeah, plate tectonic, so that it's constantly moving water, and the minerals are constantly moving, and it's just working in harmony together. So yeah, I'd say even we find out how it works, it's still amazing. It doesn't
Okay.
negate the fact that, if anything, it makes me even more impressed. Um, that God did these amazing things, and that it's not as simple as we think it is.
Okay. Now let's see. We do have some super chats that got placed. So I figured if you don't mind sticking around, because there are some questions in the chat for you.
Okay.
Um,
Sounds good.
so Uhan Roderick said pine trees give birth to elephants. Evolution. That's a reference to the Aaron Ra versus Kent Hovind debate, which I don't know if you've seen that, but that might be a good one for you to. If you like watching debates on this topic, I would
Yeah,
definitely suggest that one.
that should be a
Um,
t.
huh?
That should be a T-shirt.
Actually, I believe it is.
Oh, good.
Then Uhan also said we have actually made life from non-life in a lab. That would be the Urey Miller experiment because they put the building blocks of life in it, and then eventually life did arise in it. It was a sealed container and everything like that. So you can look it up online if you want to.
I will, because last I heard it was just amino acids. It was not
Well,
a living cell, but I'll look at it again.
okay. And then Uhan Roderick, what is the testable evidence for God?
Yeah, for me, and of course, I know you guys don't believe it. It's simply information. That's why I harp on DNA. DNA is information. Information always comes from a mind. Therefore, there's a mind behind DNA. That's my biggest reason for believing in a God.
Okay. Just to push back a little bit on that, DNA is a chemical. It's not technically information, but I mean, we using our own minds can interpret it as information so that we can notice patterns and everything like that. But it's not technically information; it's chemicals. But I mean, I go ahead.
I'm just gonna say that's to me that's like saying a letter is just ink and paper. I'm not worried about what the information's made of. It's still the information for that organism is in its DNA. So I believe it still is information, no matter what it's made of, even though it's a chemical.
Okay. And then we've got another one from Uhan. Or wait, no, Drew's book reviews is next. Life only makes life. We know because that's all we observe. Okay, then why believe in God creating life without without observing God doing so?
Yeah, I guess faith. I would say it's more logical to believe that a life outside of our universe made it than an accident. And there's some great. Carl Sagan did a great video where he explained what it would look like if a being outside of our universe, outside of our three spatial dimensions, interacted with us. So yeah, I'd say by faith. Just and I still consider God a life form. He's just not a physical life form. So it's still life begetting life. It's just a hyperdimensional, super intelligent life.
Okay. And then reasonable assumptions said, so a Buddhist is immoral then?
Yeah. So anyone, and I know, I know it's offensive. And of course, the leader of my religion got crucified. I don't know if you're aware of that, but,
Sorry. That was my wife.
but yeah, so I believe, if you look at Adam and Eve, 100% of humanity knew who God was, the real God. If you look after the flood, if you take that literal like I do, 100% of humanity after the flood knew who the real God was. So it's not God's fault that there are these other religions that came about, that evolved. So yeah, any deviation, I do believe Jesus is our creator, and I believe we are supposed to live for him. And yeah, I think any deviation from living for Jesus is immoral.
Okay. And then we got Mr. Cook Jr. This guy smells like a recent convert, out of control with nothing but assertions. I'd love for him to actually back something up. Bet he can't.
Well, man. So, my frustration and probably your frustration talking to flat earthers is, and I've been a Christian for 17 years now. I'm 34. I accepted Christ when I was 17. Yeah, it's just you can believe whatever you want to. So the watchmaker argument, I believe, is solid. You guys don't believe it. Irreducible complexity, I believe, is solid. You guys don't want to believe it. DNA is information. You guys don't believe it. So I can't make you believe anything. I can tell you why I believe, but that's as far as I can go.
Okay. And then I do have some Skeptic Mafia member comments to go through, which if you guys don't know, the Skeptic Mafia is when you hit that join link, you get access to like emojis and everything like that. So this is that particular crowd. Jonathan Hanachek, he asks, first question is, where does science prove any of the God's claim? And where is the proof that we can all go and look it up? And I would guess that you would just point to general information as your scientific evidence.
I'm sorry. I don't think I understand the question.
Well, he's basically asking where in science does it prove that a God exists?
Again, for me, it's code.
Okay.
Code does not come. A code only comes from a mind.
Okay. And then let's see, we got Chrismer who says, I've got a question for him, or more like a statement, really. What makes your God the correct God?
Yeah. So the reason why I believe in Jesus is I believe in a young earth. So there's evidence for a young earth. So obviously the Bible talks about a young universe. Jesus even said that Adam and Eve were at the beginning of creation. And so there are things like the Earth's magnetic field. There should be no more comets because they lose their mass every time they get near a star. Um, so I believe that it's a young universe. And then the health things that God told the Israelites, he told them how to avoid germs. And like I said before, germs were not discovered until the 1860s. He gave them very good dietary laws that we know now with science were very wise dietary laws. There's prophecies. There's a prophecy in Revelation that the whole world for 3 days will see the bodies of these people that were killed before they rise again. And so that's only possible with TV, internet, microchipping, of course, with the mark of the beast, and then just the words of Jesus. And even Jesus said this. He said, "My sheep hear my voice." And so when I finally read for myself the Gospels and the parables, it just made sense to me. I realize that is not objective. I realize a lot of that is just on faith, and that's really all I can give you. Um, but those are the reasons why I believe Jesus is God.
Okay. And then Chrismer also put this into his thing saying, bonus question, do you know if Pastor Tommy McMurtry is sexually attracted to pumpkins? I'm not saying he is. I'm just trying to figure this shit out. Someone should ask him.
Pastor who?
Tommy McMurtry,
I
he's
don't know who that is.
well, he's part of this new independent fundamentalist Baptist movement that held that Make America Straight Again conference recently, and so there
It's
was a whole
horrible.
yeah, there was a whole campaign against it that I was helping out, and everybody still got that on their mind.
Yeah,
Christopher's got some awesome ASCII art that I'll show here in a little bit, but it just says "I love you, chat." And then we've got Orpheus. He asked, "Why did God ghost our relationship? He was active for how many centuries, doing wonderful stuff? You know, the plagues, the Ten Commandments, angels visiting folks, and now in the modern day, nothing." So, what do you say about that?
uh, Peter in his epistle, he talks about how we have a more. He was talking about how he saw Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration, and that what we have is a more sure word of prophecy. Where I really think if we had to choose between miracles and the New Testament, I think the New Testament is a lot better information. It's just a lot more, and it's a lot more personal. And then, of course, God deals in faith, and I think we all do. I think relationships are built on trust, and Hebrews says that without faith, it's impossible to please God. You've got to believe that He exists and that He rewards those who seek Him. So yeah, that's all I can say. Usually, God's miracles go with His word. In other words, when some of the books of the Bible were being written, there were miracles around them to confirm, like with Moses, that he is actually giving a message from God. The disciples. So Paul had so many miracles done through him. So yeah, I would say that's it. So typically, God is very active with miracles and plagues um, when He's confirming His word.
Okay, so you think that miracles happen now, right?
I do, yeah.
What would be a good example of one of these miracles?
Um, typically, you got to be careful because there's so many scammers out there that pretend to heal, but I really think it happens where people are healed of different diseases and stuff like that. And um, as far as something besides healing, I can't think of anything, but I do believe there's still a lot of healing going on nowadays. It's not my gift, and I know people are trying to categorize it and actually get it where it can be more objective, where they actually have doctors' notes and stuff like that, and they've got the evidence that this person had this sickness and that they don't now. But that's as far as I can come up with that right now.
I mean, I think most of those people are pretty much just like lying or doing some kind of misdirection or whatnot. I really don't believe in faith healers at all. I think they're just they're preying on very gullible people, and so I've never seen a verified like miracle actually happening. Um, but that's neither here nor there. I get it that you understand that people are healed nowadays. I would just be very cautious about that because like no amount of Jesus's healing touch can make me stop being a diabetic. And so, like, I just don't think that that's a possible thing because it's literally never happened in reality. So I feel like it's a very reasonable position to have. Um, all right. So we got scope to low next. If you believe that the universe was consciously and specifically designed for human beings by a god, why would this god, in quotation marks, God, severely limit us to only being able to survive on a small percentage of the surface of this one planet in a multitude of planets in this galaxy, in a multitude of galaxies? If you're going to argue that the universe is consciously designed thing, then you have to either admit that it was primarily designed with the purpose of creating mostly empty space and black holes. Humans were an afterthought, or that the designer is utterly incompetent and or an immoral jackass.
Yeah, I think I kind of covered that earlier, that Adam and Eve were not supposed to die. And so imagine a world where there is no sin. So people are not lazy, people are not irresponsible, because those are two main attributes of sin. And then they live forever. You can discover some awesome technology, and then you can travel the universe quicker. So I mean, man, why wouldn't he create this huge universe for us to discover? It might seem like it's really hard for us right now, but man, again, if we didn't sin and we were able to discover technology sooner, I believe we would be way further along by now in just enjoying the rest of the universe and traveling and maybe going light speed. Even though, man, it takes a long time at light speed to was like I don't know how many billions of light years the universe is that we know of.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, it's pretty huge, but I mean, there are somewhat close stars. I think maybe 12 or so light years away. There's a star that we could possibly get to in a decade or so. But yeah. So would it be correct to say that if Eve didn't eat that apple, then we would already have a Mars colony?
Yeah, I believe so. And
So Eve's to blame for that.
no, Adam, I think.
But if
Oh,
Eve
oh,
didn't eat it, then it would. If Eve didn't eat it, then Adam wouldn't have done it either.
right. Yeah, she started it. She tempted him, but he didn't have to eat it either. But yeah, I think if they wouldn't have eaten the fruit and they would have lived forever, and they would have, I believe that affected our brains too. I think they would be able to figure out stuff quicker. Yeah, I mean, the Bible says that it's the honor of a king to hide a matter or something. It's the no, it's like something like it's the glory of God to hide a matter and the honor of a king to search it out or something like that. So man, I mean, what a fun game, I mean, did God give us stuff to discover? I think that's more fun than if God made this small universe that we could get to quickly, then we wouldn't be able to hope for more. Even in First Corinthians 13, it says that faith, hope, and love remain. In other words, heaven will always have faith, hope, and love. And I think one of those hopes is that we'll just be able to just discover more and more and more of this by then, the new universe. But I think it was meant that we would discover this universe.
Well, yeah, but I mean, if you follow the theology of the Old Testament, then I mean, it literally says in it not to trust man's wisdom, to only trust God's wisdom. So, is it really to seek out any kind of information?
Well, it would be sinless information. So if Adam and Eve didn't sin, then they would be doing things God's way and discovering all the cool stuff that we have now, technology, cell phones and TV and the great architecture and the way we build things now that they wouldn't have then. But yeah, I think God made us to discover things. It's a huge playground. I believe we ruined the playground by telling God that we want to do it our own way, but I believe God made us and made this universe as a giant playground for us to discover. And one more point is that in Jesus's, and you're going to think I'm weird, I don't care. In Jesus's resurrected body, he teleported. And so if in the Bible says we'll have bodies like him, so in the new earth, the new universe, is it really hard to believe that we won't be able to teleport to other planets in a body that can't be destroyed and just experience it? And then man, then you don't have to worry about light speed and taking a long time.
I mean,
I know
dude,
it's
if
funny. It's weird. If you read and believe the Bible, I know you sound weird,
you,
and I'm okay with that.
no. I mean, honestly, if I could get Scotty to beam me up anywhere, I mean, I
Yeah.
would definitely be overusing that guy.
Yeah, man. When my daughters, which they are now, they're in car seats, and when I first had to put them in car seats, and they cried, it was the worst, man. I was like, I wish it's going to sound evil, but I was like, I wish I could just shoot torpedoes at the cars or the rockets at cars in front of me, get them out of my way, so I could get them home and get these kids out of their car seats because I felt so bad for them.
You know, a tank works wonders too. I'm just
I
saying.
bet I should have got that at a baby shower. Get it tanked.
Let's see. Scope Tillo also has another question worked in. It's what evidence would you accept that the universe was not designed? So, like, what do you think would falsify your particular viewpoint?
I am so sold on design. I mean, I look in a mirror. I don't even think I need DNA. I look in a mirror and I'm like, this, and I look at you. I mean, I just don't think you could come about by accident. You're such an amazing organism that's able to think and see and move. And so, man, I don't, and I mean, you can't disprove God. I mean, it's not the part on the atheist to disprove God. I don't think you can come up with anything. Like you can't disprove a unicorn or a leprechaun. So I
Well,
don't think there is anything that could disprove God to me.
okay. Well, I mean, I would say that it's not up to me to disprove a general idea of God, but I could definitely disprove like your particular version of God. Like, I mean, I'm a pretty big history buff, so I mean, I know how the Old Testament was written, I know how the New Testament was written, and I don't know if you know what a mythicist is, but I'm one of those too.
No, I don't. What's a mythicist?
I don't think that Jesus actually walked on the earth. I think that he's an invention.
Gotcha. Interesting.
Yeah.
Didn't
So,
Josephus talk about him?
uh, yeah,
Okay, we can
it
briefly.
is a whole nother conversation. That one's really complex, but we could definitely have a discussion on it sometime. But no, I don't think that that Josephus originally said anything about Jesus that's like in the Bible or would have been in the first century. I think there's a lot of like textual stuff that kind of goes into that. So I don't expect you to believe me just on me saying, nope, don't believe that. Like, I would hope that you would need more information for that, but it's also kind of odd how you don't need more information to, say that, well, it's possible that this God, isn't the correct version of God because there's so many different versions of God out there.
Yeah. Well, let me make this point. I don't want to believe in God if he's not real. So I'm open to the evidence, but after seeing DNA, after seeing complex things, and I don't want to believe in Jesus if he isn't the right God. You got to understand. I mean, obviously, I'm offensive. If you take Jesus aside, it costs relationships. So I hate it when some people say, "Well, if I'm wrong about God, it didn't cost me anything." What a lie! They're obviously not living for Jesus the right way. And then my kids could grow up, accept Jesus as their savior, feel called to go into missions, and they could die early. So if Jesus isn't real and I lose friends and I potentially lose my children and people I care about because they want to go minister in China and they get locked up or killed or whatever, I mean, there's a price to pay for being wrong. So I know you guys might not believe me, but if God doesn't exist, I want to know it. And if Jesus isn't God, I want to know it because I don't want to believe a lie. That's dumb. I would be wasting my life. I teach through the Bible almost every day. So I spend about an hour preparing for a video. And what a waste of an hour of most days of my life if Jesus isn't God. So yeah, I just don't think, I mean, they could try to give me evidence. I'm not insecure about my faith. So I'll listen to anybody. I probably listen to more atheists than theists as far as apologetics. Because I'm just not afraid. I like to listen to Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and the genetically modified skeptic and Aaron. I don't want to mispronounce his name because I think Kent Hovind did, and that's disrespectful. But anyway, if there's evidence, I'm open to it. I don't, but I am so convinced about DNA, and I'm so convinced about what I mentioned about the Bible, and I'd be definitely willing to hear why the Bible isn't true, because I do want to be right. It's very expensive being wrong.
That it is, but I just would caution you about saying that it can't be disproven to me. I would probably lead off with the whole you give me evidence and I'll examine it, and if I am wrong, then I will want to know that I'm wrong. Because when you say that, oh, nothing will convince me, it makes you sound a lot like Ken Ham in his debate with Bill Nye the Science Guy,
Yeah.
where Bill would be convinced just by evidence, whereas Ken Ham is sold on the fact nothing can change his mind. And I feel like that's just a bad way to go through life. Having your mind sealed and not being willing to consider the actual evidence.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you're right. I shouldn't say it that way, because then it does sound like my whole worldview is not built on evidence, which to me it is, even though it's evidence that you guys reject.
Mhm.
So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah. Let's see. I got another question from a super chat saying, "Why don't limbs grow back?"
On us, I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
I mean, I guess I don't know.
They made a whole Spider-Man movie about trying to do that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about when you mentioned the lizards, or one of us did.
Not Joe Witness said, "Do all the button clicking, y'all. Join the Skeptic Mafia. Not only do you want to be in the cool club, but it also helps support your favorite creators." I do you have time for maybe a couple questions from the chat?
Yes.
Okay. So we got the first one's gonna go for it. He says, "Will he be missing those who don't make it into heaven? If one of us, if one of your children don't make it into heaven, would you suffer in heaven?"
Yeah, great question. Man, it would be so heartbreaking. Um, I think, and here's my thought, because I have thought about this before and talked to other people about it. So I think when we get to heaven, we're going to see how great God is, and that He tried, which I know you'll say it wasn't enough evidence, but I think He tried as much as He could to get everybody to be with Him. And, the Bible says that He doesn't delight in the wicked being punished. Um, and I do believe that there are just some people that God wants to be with, but they don't want to be with Him. You know what I mean? There's this interesting story in Revelation where it says that when Jesus comes back, He's gonna bind Satan for 1,000 years, and Jesus will be here for 1,000 years in this planet, and then at the end, He's gonna let Satan go, and Satan's gonna get an army to try to fight Jesus. So isn't that crazy? You've got people who would have been born during that 1,000 year reign. They would have seen Jesus face to face, and Satan is still able to convince them to rebel against God. Adam and Eve, they had paradise, and Satan was able to convince them to rebel against God. So I would say that no matter how much it would hurt me to lose people, I think I would always take God's side. And I know that sounds harsh, that God did everything He could to uh, to bring everyone to Him.
So you would be fine with like one of your daughters going to hell?
I wouldn't be fine with it, but and I think God saw this. God created man in His own image. The Bible says He knew that He was going to have to kill Jesus, the Lamb who was slain before the foundation of the world. He knew people would go to hell. So I think what the Trinity had to do, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, is they had to process it. Is this worth it? People are going to reject us. People are going to go to hell. Is it worth it for those who we're going to get? And I think, God saw people like me and all the other believers that believe in Him. And He's like, yeah, I want those people for eternity to be with me. I mean, God made us simply for a relationship with us. And like I said, to just give us pleasure and fun, and a playground to play in. So
I don't know. I think God's given too much pleasure in the Catholic churches.
yeah, wrong kind of pleasure. And man, and then we've got to analyze hell. So man, I think hell, Jesus described it as a place where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, there's darkness. So in other words, this place where without the light of God, um, where there's eternal depression and sadness. And I really think a lot of that is because people will see that they rejected God, and they're going to see what they missed out on, and they're going to experience that forever. So it's very possible that the fire of hell is just simply, the burning of people wishing they would have done something different or something to that effect, or just, you know, it doesn't have to be physical fire. It could just be emotional torment. That's symbolic. So no, I
Okay.
wish, I care about everyone. I really want as many people as possible to go to heaven. And I certainly want to, I pray about that daily. That, I tell God, I just want one thing for my kids is I just want them to know you. So yeah, that would be extremely painful. And I really can't tell you until I get there what that's going to be like, but it will be extremely painful if that's what happens. But the Bible does say he will wipe every tear from our eyes. And yeah, that's all I
Okay.
got.
Okay. And then we got another question. How can it be a fallen world if we have no other world to evaluate it against? How can we know?
Well, the Bible describes it, but you don't have to buy it. I mean, the Bible says that man has to work by the sweat of his brow. So imagine we didn't have to work. We could just do hobbies all day because there's plenty of food being produced. Pain in childbirth, and then the fact that we die. So really, those things, you just look at the curses in Genesis 3, and these are the things that we have now that apparently we were not intended to have to work for food. Women were supposed to enjoy childbirth, and yeah, it's really a few of those things, and just all the thorns. I'm in landscaping, and so weeds growing where you don't want them, and just everything would be easier, and we would live forever and not be sick, and yeah, stuff like that. Plenty of food. Talk to animals. How cool would that be?
Whoa, 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 whoa! Talk to animals?
Yeah, because they talked to the serpent. So I don't know if that was just this. Now we're getting into a whole nother topic of
Well, I mean, there's the snake that talked, and then there's the donkey that talked after you beat him enough.
yeah, yeah. I know that story,
I
and
mean,
it's
do you
very
think that if we
possible.
beat a donkey enough now, he would talk?
Yeah, I don't think so unless you watch Shrek.
Oh, okay. I mean, he
But
talked without being beaten.
yeah, yeah, I've read that. But I mean, um, I really think Satan was a spiritual being, and it talks about spiritual beings in the Old Testament, especially that they look like animals. So I'm not saying all the animals talked, but it sounds like the animals on earth are kind of pictures of these creatures in heaven, the cherubim and the seraphim, all those interesting names that
Can you imagine how much of a smartass cats would be?
oh gosh, that would be hilarious.
I would get a
We got
cat just
two.
Huh?
We got two cats. I got one that he looks outside every time I let the dogs out. It's almost like he's just mad. Like, why don't I get to go out?
And then we got a final question from Drew's Book Reviews. He is asking, Adam and Eve populated the world via incest as there would have been no one else if we follow the biblical worldview. How do you feel about that?
I mean, that was the only option. I mean, you've got people that were, I mean, I believe their genetic code was better, where, right now, if we had incest, it would create some issues physically. And, um, all the, the bad traits would mix together and not cancel each other out. But yeah, I mean, that's just the way it was. I mean, that was their understanding then. I mean, there's even in the Old Testament, they had multiple wives. God never truly endorsed that, but that's what they did. And then, of course, he put into it in the New Testament. But yeah, I mean, that's just the way it was. I'm okay with it. I'm glad I didn't do it, but that's just what happened. West
Uh,
Virginia? Maybe? Oh, too bad.
well, so I mean, so are you okay with like incestuous relationships now?
No, no. The Bible's
What's
not okay with it either.
how how
Now,
so?
well, there's verses against it. I can't find them, but even
Oh,
after
okay.
Jacob married sisters, Rachel and Leah, and it says later that to not do that, to not marry sisters. So even that close, and to not, a lot of that's in the Old Testament about, don't sleep with people too close to you, as far as in your family.
I don't know. God was pretty silent when David had like 10 concubines.
Oh man, what about Solomon? Shoot,
Yeah,
a
Solomon
thousand,
too.
700 and 300.
And then another super chat came in. I'm sorry for keeping you so long, but last one.
Oh, you good.
Uh, uh, they asked, wouldn't the world overpopulate? Like if sin wasn't introduced and there was no death, And wouldn't the world overpopulate like rather quickly?
Well, I think maybe by that time they can move to other planets and find out how to habit those.
Well, I mean, if Adam and Eve were well, so like as soon as Eve ate the apple, did her IQ just plummet?
I don't think so. The way I see it is just, I mean, she realized she was naked. It's almost like she was more self focused. She realized she was naked. Um, of course, she gave it to Adam. Adam realized he was naked. He blamed her, so it hurt their relationship. So no, I don't think their IQ was affected. Um, yeah, yeah. As far as I know, no, that didn't happen. But I could be
Well,
wrong.
I mean, like Adam, I'm not exactly sure about Eve, but I know Adam lived to be 900 years old. I mean, if you think about how much we've accomplished now with our puny intellect that we have now, I would think that Adam would have at least been able to get us to Mars before he kicked off.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I don't know why he didn't. But I do know, there's a lot of findings of some really amazing things in archaeology, and of course, many people think it's aliens that puts uh, some interesting technology in our world. And I would say it was just really smart. I mean, look at the pyramids. People can't figure out how those were built, and I think our ancestors were very smart.
Well, okay. So I got another question from in the room here. Where did Adam and Eve's sons' wives come from?
From them. So of course it mentions that they had their three sons, but no, I believe they had more children that are not mentioned. So they're sisters.
Yeah, yeah. It does say in the Bible that they came from like neighboring cities and stuff.
At what point?
Yeah,
Well, I mean
and
that if if Adam lived to 900, and they kept having kids, then of course there'd be cities.
okay.
So I'd have to look at the verses, but if enough
So
time passed, then there's cities that Adam and Eve's children
not to be
made.
too vulgar, but at that point, wouldn't Eve just have sort of a slip and slide?
Man, I don't know. I'm not going to comment on that one.
I mean, that's a lot. Like, I mean, that's a lot of reproduction.
Well, I haven't done the math, but if you've got Adam and Eve, if you got Adam living to 900 and he was able to reproduce when he was made, because I believe he was made as an adult, same with Eve, let's just say they had 10 children and then their 10 had 10. And just if I'd have to look at it, but after 900 years, if you don't have much to do but reproduce and work the land, that could be a bunch of kids after 900 years.
Yeah, have you seen the like the tiger that exists? That's like an incestuous tiger that it was
No,
born of incestuous relationship.
no.
Uh, no, it looks ugly. I mean,
I'll have to
it's
look that up.
bad.
Yeah, that's not a good idea right
No,
now. I think it was okay then. I think the gene pool was so pure that it didn't hurt them physically to do that.
what does a pure human look like?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I don't know. That's just where my mind goes. It's like, oh, our genetic code was pure back then. It's like, well, what does a pure human look like
Yeah,
if we have? Huh?
great question.
Yeah, I wonder
No
if we'd be
idea.
bald. Kind of like bald with really blue eyes, giant domes to contain all that knowledge. That
Yeah.
honey, let's not talk about the whale penises. Sorry. Well, anyways, Jeremy, I really appreciate you joining us tonight. Despite all of the fun having here at the end, I appreciate you staying on and everything like that, talking to us and everything. Do you want to tell everybody where like they can find you if they're interested in more of your views and stuff?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. It's been fun. Yeah. I mean, my YouTube channel is just named Jeremy Spry. Facebook page is Jeremy Spry. I just started a new one that I'm going to work on called Atheism versus Logic. Uh, so yeah, then because I was just so into atheism that I just want to separate it from my normal YouTube channel that's mainly focused on teaching the Bible. But
Oh,
yeah, they
okay.
just Atheism versus Logic on Facebook. It's there and just one post. And then I'm going to start doing videos on YouTube and videos on Facebook. And I
Okay,
would
cool.
love conversation. If I'm wrong, prove me wrong.
All right, awesome. Well, Jeremy's, I guess your personal YouTube page is put down below, but I'll definitely try to find your Atheism versus Logic channel so that people can go there if they want to have a conversation with you. But again, I really appreciate you coming on, being a good sport, and having a conversation about all this stuff, and putting up with me basically. And I guess all you heathens out there, we'll see you guys later. I'm sorry if we did not get a chance to get to your question. I did take a couple of questions from the chat, but most of them were eaten up by super chats as well as the Skeptic Mafia posts. So I guess we'll see you heathens next time. Jeremy, we'll see you again maybe sometime in the future if you decide to come back on again. And I guess you guys don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.